Every company's a tech company now. Humans are hardwired for connection. So when you think back to our very early days on the planet as humans, tribes were critical to survival. You didn't survive if you didn't have a tribe around you to protect and help you find food. And those instincts are still in us. Like a core predictor of people staying with a company is if they have a work best friend. When it boils down to it, we're still humans and we still desire purpose. When you're building complex technology on top of complex technology into an entity that, if used incorrectly, can kill people. Vehicles not designed well or not paid attention to. So there's that need for human input into the work products.
I'd like to welcome Lori Costew to the show. Lori, welcome.
Thanks, Drew. Thrilled to be here.
Awesome. Hey, could you maybe just take a minute for the audience, introduce yourself, and tell us how you reached this major life milestone you just hit?
I'd be happy to. I'm probably an anomaly in the world today. I have actually spent 30 years at one company. So I was honored to serve Ford Motor Company, hiring into a plant. We're a manufacturing company. It's the best place to learn. And throughout this career, being part of a very large, global, complex organization, I had 16 different jobs within that career span all at one place, from human resources to leading HR for Lincoln, the Lincoln Motor Company, being in business development and marketing. And then the last job that I had before I retired was Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer.
So you've clearly had, and congratulations on such a great career. And to your point, at such a great company and for that duration. At this point, I'm just so curious to get your vantage point, your perspective. And one of the roles that you had, if I looked in your resume correctly, was HR in the robotics division. Is that right?
It was a little bit broader than that. So it was leading HR for all of our mobility, autonomous vehicles. It was our global data and analytics organization, Ford Smart Mobility, where we were buying and building small companies to help us test. It was almost like a sandbox for us to learn from other smaller companies. Then what can we incorporate into what we're doing and take those learnings in a faster, safer, more agile way?
Yeah. And then having your final role be the Chief Diversity Officer, right? Human Resource and Diversity. There's an intersection there, I think, about diverse thought and diversity, as well as just the proliferation of technology. Would love to just get your general thoughts on that right now.
So when you think of our customers, encompass people from around the world, genders, different backgrounds, different experiences. And you can't design vehicles, services, and experiences if you're coming from a singular viewpoint. You need those different experience bases. I think one of the greatest examples we had of that was we had a female chief engineer for the Mustang, iconic Mustang.
Yeah.
And she got in the vehicle at the test track, and her heel got caught in the floor mat. It was a funky kind of a floor mat. And she said, wait a minute, did you factor this in? And of course, it was young male engineers who said, just take your shoes off. All right, that's not the right answer, because we sell to women who wear heels, right? That's just a very small example. But when you integrate different areas and different viewpoints, you create better products, services, experiences. Another group that we work very closely with is our employee resource groups around disabled, different. And when you think about it, if you can create egress and entry into a vehicle for someone who is physically challenged, we all at some point put our backs out. People are aging, right? When you make it better for a certain demographic, you're actually making it better for all customers and making it easier. So that human-centered design perspective is really important, whether you're creating software, whether you're creating a vehicle, any type of a service. If you approach it from that mindset, it's always going to be better.
Absolutely. And I love what you just said, right? When you make it better for a certain demographic, it makes it better for all. Rising tide lifts all boats. We'll shift the conversation a little bit to technology, robotics, AI. What were some of the most popular problem spaces that you see being tackled right now based off of the perspective you have over the last few years at Ford?
Every company's a tech company now, and automobiles are no exception. With computers, you can always reboot. You can't reboot your vehicle. So you really have to be very thoughtful about the technology that's going in. And it has to be recognized that technology is a tool. And just like a hammer is not the right tool for every project, people have to understand what is the technology that's going in, and then being very cognizant of using common sense. Because if you even look at things like the Chat GPT, which is phenomenal, like I've been playing around in that, it truly is phenomenal. Yet if you take it at the surface level, you could actually go down a very wrong path, or you could come across confirmation bias, or you could unintentionally discriminate. So it's how are you using common sense, and how are you taking that as a starting point, and then determining what are you going to use. How do you start? And then what do you end up finishing with? And where's that human part of it? It should be an augmented helping to help eliminate maybe some of the more administrative functions, or get started on a coding project. My son is a software engineering student, and he said he's used it and it's a start, but he said, and it looks on the surface like that, the algorithm will be correct. He said, but it's not. And even when he went back to try to teach it, so he basically said, okay, it's a starting point, then I have to use my own brain, and I have to incorporate in where we need to. So it's that taking that critical eye is really important, because it's a tool and it's not an outcome.
Absolutely. As we think about this, AI, I think, has opened the door. It's automation and robotics. We're waiting for AI to come in order for those two movements to evolve as well. And we're seeing so much in the news now, if it leads, right? The rise of the machines. And there's so much fear-based media out there. There was a recent report by the World Economic Forum. I think it had about a little over 80 million jobs that they said would probably be displaced by AI alone. Now, that same report showed 90 million jobs. I would argue it's going to be well over 100 million jobs created, right, because of this. But I'm sure working at a company that does manufacturing, right, of tangible goods, this is always a fear, right? If machines are taking over in such a way, and you just hinted at it a bit with to augment, what was the philosophy at Ford, and how did you help people workforce overcome that fear?
Let's just be clear. We're still in the very, very beginning stages of this.
That's right.
And some of it is, I think the companies that do this right they're going to watch for the unintended consequences. So if you go back and you think, okay, when we look at self-service, whether you're a customer with a product or you're an employee, the companies that simply turn on self-service without looking at it from that human experience perspective are actually going to waste more money. You might save money from a system perspective, but you're going to waste a whole lot of money if you have employees that are spending more and more time trying to figure out what they're supposed to be doing, or customers who, quite frankly, might get tired of you and say, I'm done with this chatbot. If I can't talk to a person, I'm going to go down and find another supplier who's going to help me. So there's some real integral pieces here that you can't forget the human element, especially when you're in things that are going to be customer facing. Clearly the manufacturing floor, we've had robotics for decades. There's certain things that are much safer for a robot to put together than it is for a human to put together. But I'm thinking more, in the knowledge worker space, that there's so much goodness that can come, but you have to also put those strategic enablers into place. So there's going to be certain roles where it makes a lot of sense to use AI and Chat GPT and that type of a thing. And other roles may not make sense. So you need to look at legal and regulatory. For example, if you just said, okay, we're going to get rid of our public relations and let AI write all our press releases, that's probably not a good idea. Because you could do damage to your brand. But if you say we're going to use it to write the start, and then a human comes in and goes, okay, this is how I can make this better, then that's the appropriate use of it. The fear you have is companies, they downsize, right? When you think, okay, automation's going to come in, I'm not going to need as many jobs. If you say, okay, automation's coming in, so Drew, now instead of the job you used to have, you're going to do 3 people's jobs, but you'll be augmented. You still have to check, you still have to review, you still have to use that base. And if people and employees are too overloaded, or they make the assumption that everything that comes out of the AI is correct, then you're going to have those unintended consequences. You could either go down a very wrong path. You could actually slow down innovation because it's only taking you to a certain point.
Yeah.
As humans, we have a bias towards experts. This is why a lot of people don't seek a second opinion on something, or this is what the doctor said, or this is what the expert told me. And we hear the phrase common sense isn't so common. This is where common sense is actually becoming more important now than it ever has in our history, because we have now a product that's come out and you either release it or you actually look and make sure is it hitting the mark.
And what you were just talking about before you mentioned those concerns, you said there are many good things that should come out of it. Can you maybe elaborate on that a little more? What are the good things to come out of this?
Clearly, the administrative work, the setting things up, can you start the email, for example, just asking basic questions. I went in and just was asking if I was coming in as a brand new people leader, how do I deal with performance issues? So you can go into a system and you can read through and go, okay, this is actually really helpful to me. Or can you start crafting a note to say, how do I handle this kind of a situation? So if you think of it as truly an enabler, those are those things that are going to be really helpful. Press release, the beginning of the correspondence, the research, but it's then saying, okay, now I'm going to take all this and then what really makes sense, because what can sound good may not always be entirely accurate or what's needed in the context, because you can lose context really easy when you get lost in details.
Yeah, absolutely. Fair to say that technology is like this, a big platform shift, right? That we're undergoing right now with AI being incorporated into our lives, integrated. Actually, I wouldn't even say it's been incorporated yet. It's been introduced. Here on the show, we talk about the phenomena that as machines continue to take on those more transactional elements of work, being able to make the very objective decisions and workflows for us, then that's leaving humans, right, to tackle the more relational or subjective components. In this new world, what do you think humans are truly left to do?
There's a lot more for humans left to do. When you think of the advances that we need to come, we can't address big, huge issues like climate change and big, huge issues like solving for cancer and other diseases. And these are all enablers coming in. But when it boils down to it, humans are hardwired for connection. So when you think back to our very early days on the planet as humans, tribes were critical to survival. You didn't survive if you didn't have a tribe around you to protect and help you find food. And those instincts are still in us. Like a core predictor of people staying with a company is if they have a work best friend. So those human connections are still really important. You think of companies that have internship programs, right? They intentionally put a social aspect to it in addition to students learning and determining if they're going to become employees in the future, because that social need and that networking need are so critical. When it boils down to it, we're still humans. And we still desire purpose. There's a war for talent, and I won't say it's every skill, but there's clearly critical skills that there's not enough of. And so how are you attracting that talent is still very important. How are you treating that talent? Skills are now pretty much industry agnostic. And I think back on my early days in automotive and way before I ever started. If you went into the automotive industry, you tended to stay just at that company. Or if you were adventurous, you might go down the street to General Motors, or God forbid, you'd go into Ohio and go to one of the transplants. But that's all changed because the skills that are needed are so different now and are much more complex and much more. There wasn't a data and analytics function 20 years ago. So those are all new skills that are coming in. And when you're building complex technology on top of complex technology into an entity that, if used incorrectly, can kill people, vehicles not designed well or not paid attention to. So there's that need for human input into the work products. But just that if you want to attract and retain great talent, you have to treat them as humans, and you have to give them work that feels valuable and that has purpose for them. And when you think of, I'll say more of the late millennials, the Gen Z now in the workforce, their lives have been completely upended. They saw parents lose jobs. They've seen big the recessions that happened. Pensions are a thing of the past. There was social isolation due to COVID. And there's this now more of an awakening around the importance of DEI work in companies, not just because it's the right thing to do for a couple of groups. No, it's because they care about their peers. They care about the planet. So we see now a focus on ESG, environmental, social, and governance, like we've never seen before. And a large part is the younger generation coming in saying, I'm not going to work for a company that's detrimental to the planet. I'm not going to work for a company that doesn't care about me and my friends and even the people that I don't know. And they're saying loyalty is a two-way street. I'll come and do a great job for you, but you need to do the right things, not just for me, but from a wider systemic lens.
So clearly, I think ongoing future, as technology proliferates, the human elements of work become more human. We begin to move about our economies and engage with businesses. We're going to yearn for the more human elements because there'll be so much transactional stuff happening. So I think there's alignment on the future. When any big platform change happens, there's always some amount of displacement. If you had to hypothesize, what sorts of jobs or roles do you think would be displaced? And then my follow-on question to that is, where do you think the obligation for upskilling and retraining should live? Is it a government movement, or is it an obligation of the business community to do that?
Let me start with that one first. It can't just be government. It can't just be corporations. There has to be a systems approach that brings employers, that brings educational providers, that brings in certain government entities, right? If you're going to do a true upskilling, many organizations themselves can't afford and don't have all the resources to do that. So I know Ford and Google have had a wonderful partnership where they're working on upskilling and creating coding camps. And how are we bringing people into the workforce that may have been disadvantaged before? Because again, there's a war for talent. And how are we going to get these skills? There's other areas that we never considered before. When you look at what's somebody's superpower, when you think of people with ADHD or those on the autism spectrum, their superpower is focus. And so we've done some at Ford, we've done some partnering with a local organization that teaches coding to people on the autism spectrum. And we've actually hired some of these incredible candidates to become full-time employees because that's their superpower. They can focus on the coding. And now we've made life better from a human perspective, but we've made life better for our company because we're hiring great employees. Right. So we have to think very differently. Colleges are great. I have one child in college, one heading to college, but that's not the path for everybody. So what are those apprenticeship programs looking like? How we know the pace of change, like a Moore's Law. There's so much change in technology that someone coming out of college can't keep up with that. What kind of certification programs are we putting people into? How are we helping them understand? We still have an economy that's always going to need electricians. It's always going to need plumbers. Right. It's always going to need builders. So it's acknowledging that, yes, there could be AI that can help with some of those jobs, but some of these are fundamental work with your hands. Yes. And they're critical to our infrastructure and social well-being. So it's understanding what's in the knowledge worker space. And I almost hesitate to use that term because all jobs involve knowledge, but more from an office perspective versus more hands-on work. And there's a place for both. And we can't leave people behind in the knowledge economy.
Absolutely. What you just said about not helping, but working with folks that are neurodivergent, super important. As the father of an ASD child, that means a lot. And it is just so critical. I just think even if you look at like labor shortages, it's very critical as well. What do you think that says about leadership in business? And there's been somewhat of a movement with emotional intelligence and need for that. With neurodivergence and accepting of that, I almost feel like there's a need for neuro-based leadership, right? Beyond just knowing your own triggers and emotions, you need to understand others. How could you maybe speak a little bit about where you see that space going?
We always will need great leaders. And when you think of the best boss, let me ask you this. Think of the best boss that you ever had. What was that person like?
They were caring. The way I say it is they knew how to drive me and influence me the way that I liked it, right? The way that it resonated with me, and would create that safety so that I could be myself. And that you used the term superpowers before, right? That I could look at those and lean on those superpowers, right? And not try to be like, we all know if you focus on the positive things, you lean into those positive things, you place the bets on the things you're good at, you're going to have a much better outcome for all. I think the best leaders I've had seen that in me and coached me in that way.
And because of that, did you deliver more than you even thought was possible?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
So why wouldn't we want every leader in a company to have those attributes? Because you get the best out of people when they feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves, when they're learning, they're driving, they're growing, they're delivering. And that takes a level of empathy. You have to, not sympathy, but empathy. What drives people, everybody's different. And unfortunately, I think one of the drawbacks is we've lost a lot of the leadership training that was in place over the years. And most companies, you promote people because they're really good at their job. So I'll use an engineer, for example, right? So young engineer hires in, grows their career, does great work and says, okay, you're ready for a promotion now. I anoint you to be a people leader now. You can be a great engineer, but you may not know how to be a great people leader. So organizations still, when you talk about being human, we have to help new people leaders and tenured people leaders. How do they treat their employees? How do they get the best out of their employees? How are they helping them grow? Because if you're not helping someone grow within their organization, they're going to leave and they're going to go find somewhere else to grow. So it's, again, when you boil it back down to humanness, how are you helping the humans grow and thrive and deliver?
Yeah.
Because your whole business success depends on that.
Very well said. And amidst all of this, there's a lot of tension, I think, naturally in the employer relationship, and it can be viewed in a negative light. I think it's one of those other things, just like we were talking about, the fear-based elements of AI, the media loves it, right? Also, the amount of tension in igniting the flames and fanning the flames of distrust between the employee and the employer is something else that happens. And I even go as far to say that sometimes it feels like the employee-employer relationship is broken. How do you respond to that comment, and what do you attribute to your beliefs?
I think it depends on the organization. When people recognize that their skills and their competencies are their currency, and I'm not going to stay in an organization that's not valuing my skills and my competencies, because I have that currency, I have that agency, and I can go elsewhere. And that's what we're seeing a lot more of. And companies, there's so much that's been done around automation and how do we make things easier? Even just think back, how many times have you been frustrated because you really just need to get to a human to ask a question, and you get caught in this long phone chain of hit 1, hit 2, hit 3, and then you get disconnected at the end. Or as an employee, you're now told, okay, you're all self-service now, but you can't find what you need, and you spend hours, instead of hours being an employee doing your job, you spend hours trying to solve your own question because there's no one there to ask. So it's taking that employee-centered approach, customer-centered approach into everything that you're doing, because the organizations that lose sight of the importance of retaining employees, especially the more complex your product is, the harder it is to have people churn every 1, 2, 3 years.
Yeah.
You look at, I'll go back to vehicles. With the average cycle time of a vehicle can be between 5 and 7 years.
Right.
And now things happen in between and technology updates, of course. But if you have people constantly churning because they're not feeling their currency is being utilized at their organization, you can have some big ramifications at the end. And not all long tenured employees are bad, and not all new employees are bad. So it's finding what is that balance, and how are you honoring having the understanding of the business, understanding of the product with new ideas coming in. And I think it's the organizations that can figure that balance out are going to be the most successful.
Okay, so you just made the statement, their skills and their competencies are their currency. Love that. How do you think if you were to ask the question, what is the value of a human in the work context? How would you help someone understand what that is? What are the variables involved? Like, how do you actually place a value on a worker?
That is such a complex question. I think it depends on the mindset of the organization. We have organizations that put a lower premium on because they can churn people in and out, and it doesn't have dramatic impact to their business. Those organizations that try to do that in a much more complex way, or have in much more complex businesses, are going to struggle significantly, because if you don't have value, if your employees are not feeling like they are valued and feel psychologically safe to contribute, they're going to go. They may stay, or worse, they stay, but they're counting their days, they're disengaged. It's almost better to have somebody leave than be disengaged at work. Personally, place a very high value on humans in the experience. And there's a lot of organizations that also do that. And then there's some that I would say they're struggling, because you can't put profits before people, because if you invest in the people, you get the higher profits.
So to go a little deeper on this, so if we had things like your skills, certifications, maybe productivity, if we were to think about the different variables that one could use to be like, oh yeah, this person's generating value in the organization and therefore they are worth something, what would be some more of those things you'd put on that list?
I think it would depend on the industry, right? If you're in sales, it's going to be how much are you generating? How big is the profit? Mm-hmm. If you're in healthcare, it's how healthy is the patient, and is the patient needing to come back in for more and more care because it wasn't done right in the first place? The metrics really depend on the industry itself. I think if you look at just business overall, one of those metrics that I think gets overlooked is how are you developing people? When you think of a board of directors' primary job is CEO succession planning. They need to make sure the company's doing well, but that's a major fact of what the board does. And if you have a company that does not have a focus on developing employees and succession planning and getting people ready for these bigger and bigger jobs, then a gap that can't be fixed or addressed quickly. I'm a big believer that when you have to have leaders that are not just technical experts, you got to have your technical experts, but if you're going to have leaders, they have to look at the entire value chain of that employee. And what does that life cycle look like for an employee? And where can they enable growth along each step of that employee journey? Because when you do that, you get stronger employees, you're training them so they can do a better job, you're preparing them for leadership roles, you're teaching them how to be people leaders. So when they become a people leader, they know how to treat people and get the best out of them. That to me is a very untapped resource that we lose sight of when we're focused on profits and technical skills. Again, all very important things, but it's an and, it's not an or.
Yeah. What I love about what you just talked about, right, is even if you went down that track of a leader should be a people leader, one of their performance metrics should be how they develop others. Really all those things that you just mentioned are their human abilities, their ability to connect, to listen, to care, right? In the future, clearly there will be more of this need, more of a need to correlate these skills, codify them, so we can correlate them to business output. Because as you were saying, sales, cool. You generated a sale, we see revenue, right? You're in healthcare, you have patient health. Those are very tangible outcomes, things that you, as a business society, we are pretty good at measuring. But these things that you're talking about, these human abilities, we are woefully unsophisticated as a business society, in my view, to correlate those skills to business value. And so my question is, how do you see this evolving, the future of performance measurement? Do you think we should go down let's just try to make it more of these productivity metrics and that's how we'll solve it? Or is there a space to be had here? Is there something that we should be looking at as a business community to truly understand these human abilities and correlate them?
They say there's only two types of companies who are redoing their performance management plan and companies that are planning to redo their performance management
Love that.
If anyone could figure this one out, they would be multi-gazillionaires. There's no perfect system, and everyone comes at it from a different lens.
Yeah.
And so more and more, though, we need to think in a systems way. It used to be you'd have your finance people just doing finance things and marketing just doing marketing and HR, product development. But the more that you can understand and integrate among all of those together and create these much better flows, you'll get better products, but you'll have people that are using much more common sense, and you're not going to have all those missed handoffs. And I think when we focus so much on the metrics and driving metrics, and metrics are important, I don't want to dismiss that at all, but we focus so much on the metric, do you miss the context? And do you miss why this is important? And do you actually start going back to a solid individual performance versus the team and the company level of performance? Because in many cases, if I do well, it's going to be to your detriment. And that's the concern you have when you focus on over-indexing on compensation to your top performers. Yes, of course, you want to reward top performers, but you can't do it to the detriment of a team who's trying to be collaborative to get something out the door faster than it's ever been done before in a higher quality way. It's really, how is team measurement being handled? And then all of those subtleties that happen along the way, because if you're just focused on hitting your metrics and you don't have a metric around developing people, what are you going to focus on? You're going to focus just on. It's a really important question you're asking that's incredibly complex. And I think people have been attacking bits and pieces, but there hasn't really been, that I'm aware of, a great solution.
Yeah. We have job standards. There's ONET where you can go and get like all the job standards, but there are no performance standards. And I think there's definitely a world to be had there. And love where you're going on this cyclical nature of focus on the individual versus the team. You just talked about maybe there is a movement away from individual performance. You could also look at this too and say, this focus on individual performance, on individual metrics, it leads to internally almost like I'm going to care about myself before I care about others. And I think you could argue that this is one of the accelerants to the freelance and fractional work movement, right? Just a straight question here. Do you think it's possible for a company to build a product, go to market, everything that you need to do 100% on freelancers?
I don't think so. Not 100%. Now, do you want to tap into specialty skills on a just an in-time basis? I think there's a much bigger market for fractional leadership than exists today, but I think it's out there, especially when you look at just the generational shifts. Like the boomers are our largest generation and they're leaving the workforce in droves, but many of them aren't quite ready to stop work. Tapping into that expertise for a period of time is really, really important. The concern of 100% generated fractional leadership is, how do you get to that higher level purpose and mission that everyone's working on if it's only bits and bits of what they're doing? Some of it depends on the complexity of the product and the interdependencies between these different groups, because you can have a lot of unintended consequences. And if you're not tied to the output, then you're not going to be as invested. If I'm just going to jump in and just do a 6 months job, if I don't do it as great as I probably should, who's going to notice? And I'm not attached to the outcome because I'm off to my next thing. So I think there's absolutely a market for fractional leadership, but to be successful at it is really pulling in, ensuring every single person is aligned to the mission, they're aligned to purpose. How is this impacted? And then in their contract, what are they accountable for? Because if they don't deliver what they're going to be accountable for delivering, how do you come back? In a normal company, you can be terminated, or you can have your bonus cut, or how do you ensure accountability amongst a large number in the fractional leadership space?
That's right. Yeah. What I get fascinated by is the freelance fractional movement, which was happening before the pandemic. Pandemic accelerated that for sure. And maybe some people could argue that there's a pendulum and perhaps it swung a little too far in one direction. What I get excited about by it, though, is it started to revolutionize the way that we think about the employee-employer contract. Upwork, the biggest freelance platform, just announced earlier this year that they're now allowing companies to do full-time contracts with their platform. And there's also a rising trend at the same time we're seeing out there on union activity and things of that nature. So I'm looking at all this. What do you think this says about, at least here in the US, the future of at-will employment?
another not so easy to answer question, because there's so many variables. You have people that want flexibility, yet they want stability. There's this rising need for equity, and the have and the have-nots are saying, wait a minute, I'm delivering a product. I want to be rewarded because my skills and my competencies are my currency. And there's definitely an interest in unions to grow. Like the number of unionized employees over the past decades has gone down significantly. And you have certain union leadership members that are saying, wait a minute, we can go beyond the traditional markets that have been automotive, steel, teachers, healthcare. They're looking at Starbucks as a prime example. So they're viewing as, what are these areas that more and more people are entering the employment area in? And then companies that aren't treating the employees the way the employees want to be treated are going to be at a higher risk of unionization.
Nice place for us to end this conversation is on career development. Today, career development is wholly subsidized. You'd say there's some elements where the worker subsidizes it, but by the business. And in that way, the business is the primary beneficiary. And so what I think that leads to is much more pigeonholing of careers, of jobs, right? You end up on tracks that are not truly catered to your own values and your own true talents and superpowers. So there's that. There's even the misnomer. I think a lot of workers think that there are talent agencies or recruiters out there. The first thing you're at a dinner party, I'm looking for a new job. Oh, you should find a headhunter, right? Headhunters don't work for people. They work for the business, right? And however, this freelance fractional movement, there's this push for remote work. There's clearly a little bit more of a wedge, and employees, at least or workers for this period of time, have a little more leverage. Do you think we'll start to see a world where workers could be financing, subsidizing, driving more of their own career development without being beholden to a company?
Oh, we're seeing it right now. When you think about your skills and your competencies are your currency. So that's why you see people that typically may have in the past, I'll say, job hopped within their own company, like I did, in different areas. Now they're job hopping to other companies to get those core experiences that they're looking for. Money's clearly a thing, right? Most people make more money if they job hop, but some are doing it to get an experience they couldn't get in their previous employer. Yes, the people's sense of agency is stronger than it's ever been. More people now looking into certification programs, Coursera. I know many people who use the free Coursera programs because they're learning. And so they're taking charge of their own career development and making it very clear, again, war for talent. If I have the skill set you're looking for, if you're not going to reward me, then I'm going to go somewhere else. And so you hear some companies say, I don't want to train people because they're just going to leave. Well, you're not going to have the right people if you don't train them anyways, right? They're still going to leave because they don't get it, or you're going to have a whole bunch of untrained people in your company. Right. So there still is a need for employer-led development, particularly if in the succession planning space, where you're looking for certain skills in order to grow. But I'm seeing a lot more, I'll say, agency in just the general human who's saying, I want to learn about this. I want to do this. The pandemic really made people shift. In some cases, I don't want to grow the career anymore. I want to do something that's going to be more fulfilling to me. And it might be in a completely different area than what their college major was or their prior occupation was. I know someone who left corporate America to become a fitness instructor, right? They just really made that shift. I think we're going to see a lot more. Employers do need to step up in the development space, particularly because it's impacting their brand, their employment brand, as well as their brand reputation. But people are saying, I'm going to I got agency, I'm going to own it, and I'm going to drive what I want to drive. And if I have to leave to get what I want, I'm going to leave to get what I want.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're definitely aligned in that way. And as I say it, as humans, I think we want to find work that aligns with our values and be with people who share them, right? And we clearly want to take care of our greatest asset, which, as you've been saying, is your competencies or your currency. I couldn't agree with that more. Lori, this has been amazing. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about before we wrap up today?
I'd say that kind of the last thing is in the DEI space. It's much more important than I think a lot of people are giving it credit to, both in when you feel like you can belong at a place, you're going to give a lot more. And I like to give this analogy. Think back to 7th grade. You're a middle schooler, got your little backpack on, you're standing at the cafeteria door praying that there's an open seat at the table with your friends.
Mm-hmm.
And when you don't see that open seat, the nervousness that sets in. And so it's truly the importance of creating a place where people do feel like they belong. Because when you feel like you belong, I'm not saying you're going to go be best friends with everybody. That's not the point at all. But when you feel like you can belong, you bring your best ideas, you work harder than you think that you normally would. You want to be part of something bigger than yourself. All of those things are really important, and it's fundamental. It's not about programs. It's truly about people. And we've got this one basic instinct that we all have, and that's that need to belong.
I love that. Yeah. And I love that call to action. Feels like a lot of businesses got on that train during the pandemic. It doesn't seem like many are staying on it in light of what's happening so it seems to be one of those rainy day things. And yeah, so well said. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew. I really enjoyed our conversation and looking forward to hearing more.
Okay.